Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hi, I'm Flight Lieutenant Chris Solly and welcome to the latest RAF Inside Air podcast. In this episode, we're off to the RAF Centre of Aerospace Medicine, or CAM as it's known, at RAF Henlow.
We occupy a strange role for doctors in that we do medicine, but we also do science, and we sort of dabble in engineering as well.
Stand by for rapid decompression in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now. 5 seconds.
So you do have the happy hypoxic where they just giggle away and they're very happy, but you also have the kind of drunk student, or we haven't had any aggressive students, thankfully, but yes, definitely drunk giggly are quite common.
We'll also be reheating a few stories which could have slipped under your radar, and we'll be finding out who's under the hat this week with AS1 Ben Russell.
What's the best thing about your job?
Being a reservist offers so many opportunities to work with incredible people from all different medical trades. The people are definitely the best bit.
In today's episode, we're taking a look around the RAF Centre of Aerospace Medicine. Aircraft rapid decompression and loss of oxygen can be life-threatening for aircrew. Knowing what to expect and how to recognise hypoxia are just some of the life-saving scenarios aircrew train for at the centre, known as CAM. We sent Inside Air's medical correspondent to find out more.
Hello, I'm Wing Commander Sarah Charters. I've been an aeromedical evacuation nurse for 34 years. I've come to the RAF Centre of Aerospace Medicine at RAF Henlow to find out what has changed since the last time I visited CAM in the early 90s. Joining us today is Group Captain Christian Mears, Commanding Officer of CAM. Sir, welcome to Inside Air.
Thank you.
Now, one of your key outcomes is to help aircrew survive and thrive in a hostile aerospace environment. Aside from our opponents, what makes the aerospace environment hostile?
So very much there are a number of factors that we look at when we're talking about a hostile environment, but essentially we're talking about altitude, we're talking about temperature, we're talking about G, so all those scientific aspects of putting the human in a very dangerous environment, trying to operate and fight machinery, be that fast jets, so the Typhoons and the F-35s, all the way down to helicopters, so the Chinooks and the Pumas and every other type of aircraft that we've got. And it's all about the fitting of human to machine and machine to human. It's that interface to make sure that both the human is fit to fly and that aircraft is fit for the human to fly, and getting after that. And it is honestly one of the most exciting areas of medicine as well as science and technology to be involved in.
It does sound fascinating. From my research, I've realised that CAM is so much more than just the aircrew. So can you tell me a little bit more about the wide-ranging and diverse roles that CAM undertakes?
Of course I can, and I very much look forward to taking you round CAM this afternoon. But what I would just say is that we've had a recent name change to the Centre of Aerospace Medicine, and this is based on our 25-year history on this site. So we essentially amalgamated on this site in the 90s and recently celebrated in 2023 our 25th anniversary, and it's from that the name was changed to Aerospace, better representing where we as CAM are moving forward into the future, and that's very much into hypersonic and space. And I hope as we go around this afternoon we'll get a flavour for that in this first podcast, but then also I think you're doing a second podcast to actually get after the future of aerospace medicine, which is certainly a very exciting thing to be part of.
That sounds brilliant. Shall we get going?
Let's go. Right, okay, so we'll leave the HQ element of CAM and we will wander down to our, please after you, we'll wander down to our hypoxia trainers.
This place is absolutely huge.
It is very much, yeah. So when it was amalgamated onto the site, essentially there were 2 hangars that were kind of vacant at the time. So it was very much putting them together. And to actually look at the floor plate, you think, oh, this is too big for what you need. But when you go into each and every area of work going on here, and we've got 5 wings here, you can actually see that all the space is absolutely utilised. So please come on through.
Thank you. And tell me about the wings. What are the 5 wings that you have?
So the 5 wings we've got here, so we've got the Aerospace Medicine Training Wing, we've got the Aerospace Medicine Specialist Wing, we've got the Environmental Occupational Health Wing, we've also got the Aviation Medicine Specialist Clinic. So we have our uniformed consultants come in and look after our patients from an occupational point of view. So specialist cardiology services, respiratory, neurology, all come through here. And then we've got our support elements. And we're obviously just here passing through the chamber room where we've got our 4 hypobaric chambers, and very much we'll get to see those in operation in a bit. But as I say, we're just coming down here to see our hypoxia trainer, where we actually expose our air crew to the effects of hypoxia at ground level.
So the purpose of the hypoxia training unit is to enable pilots to actually experience hypoxia, know how to recognise it, and then be able to take appropriate actions. Is that right?
It is indeed in as safe an environment as possible, which is at ground level. However, we have Wing Commander James Gellner here, who is OC of the Aerospace Medicine Training Wing, and he'll be able to explain that to us.
So here we are standing in the scenario-based hypoxia training suite, where we have, you can see here, we have 3 hypoxia training chairs, very much what you would expect in the aircraft cockpit, and in front of them they will have a sort of flight simulator. For our non-air crew, they'll be presented with a different tool of suites, which we'll come on to talk about. So why are we here? So these students go through the hypoxia and altitude training course, and this is risk to life mitigating training that we provide. So what is hypoxia, you might ask? So as aircraft gain altitude, the air becomes thinner, and we call that a lower barometric pressure. So there's less oxygen around. So even at a modest altitude of about 8,000 feet, so the same as the sort of cabin altitude of many commercial airliners, there's actually 25% less oxygen available than at sea level. So even at modest altitudes, there's quite a reduction in the amount of oxygen available. And so we want to let our aircrew experience that. So oxygen is vital for our bodies to function. And if you keep ascending, you would become ultimately unconscious, and it would become fatal eventually. So why do we train here? Well, there are 3 main reasons why hypoxia occurs. First of all, if aircrew haven't elected to use oxygen, so that might perhaps occur on a rotary wing flight if they weren't expecting to go over a mountain ridge, or there are many cases in the past sort of civilian world of aircraft and pilots who have not used oxygen and becoming hypoxic with often fatal consequences. The second cause of hypoxia is the failure of either the oxygen mask or the delivery equipment. And then thirdly, if a rapid decompression of the aircraft occurs, where the seals go and the loss of pressure inside the cabin, that would lead to a rapid onset of hypoxia. And so for that, we actually use our chamber, which we've just passed outside, and all aircrew will go through the chamber once in their career. We currently use a run of 2,000 to 12,000 feet, rapidly decompress them to altitude, so they get to feel what it's like when your sinuses and the air in your bowels wants to expand, going up by about 30%. However, here we are in the scenario-based trainer, and we reduce the oxygen delivered to the student so that they can recognise those symptoms and take the appropriate action. So we call this recognition recovery training. Hypoxia risk is actually becoming less likely now with modern aircraft, but aircrew will still develop similar physiological symptoms which can affect their thoughts and actions. So that's why we do this training, so that they take the appropriate action and ultimately will save their lives and make flying safe.
And if for instance, a pilot or an aircrew member did experience a rapid decompression, how long have they actually got to recognise that they're going into a hypoxic state and take action before they would lose their sort of useful consciousness?
So they need to take immediate action, and so ideally you would be on oxygen prior to the rapid decompression. I'd like to introduce Dr. Vanessa Garnello-Ray, who's here with us.
To answer your question, obviously the amount of time that students have to take corrective action in the event of a rapid decompression is very much altitude dependent, because obviously the higher you are, then the less time you have to take corrective action. To give you an example, any one of us going on holidays on a commercial airliner, if we were to experience a rapid decompression at cruising altitude, we're talking about maybe a minute, 2 minutes maximum that we can take corrective action, which is why the oxygen masks for the passengers drop immediately if we lose cabin pressurization. Whereas if a decompression happens, let's say 18,000 feet, obviously you still have to go on emergency oxygen, but the time of useful consciousness that you mentioned is obviously a lot longer than 2 or 3 minutes. So it's very much altitude dependent, but also what you were breathing beforehand. So there is a big difference between the fast jet community, because they do fly on an oxygen system. So if there is a rapid decompression, they are already starting with good oxygen levels in the lungs and the blood. Whereas in a commercial airliner, for example, or a multi-engine aircraft, the cabin is pressurized at 8,000 feet, so you're not starting with normal oxygen levels anyway. So in the event of a rapid decompression, the time to act is a lot shorter for that reason. So it's altitude dependent, but also, you know, the amount of oxygen you were breathing before the decompression.
So does that mean with the equipment you have here, there's some flexibility to change between aircraft types, for example, or scenarios, so that the aircrew can get a role-specific experience?
It is very difficult to replicate a scenario that will cause hypoxia in the air, because every situation is different. So it is impossible from a training perspective to simulate a perfect scenario, because there will be many factors involved when aircrew go hypoxic in the air. So the way that we simulate, for example, a potential rapid decompression is actually taking the students up to 25,000 feet, let's say, very quickly, so as fast as the machine can make them hypoxic. They do not experience the pressure changes, because this is not hypobaric training, but still the hypoxia symptoms come on very, very quickly, simulating something similar to a rapid decompression. So we use different profiles depending on the platform they fly, but also the experience. So some of the students that sit here is actually the first time that they do experience hypoxia. So we don't use a profile that is very aggressive or with a rate of climb that is very fast, because the whole point of it initially is to allow them sufficient time to recognize that something is happening to them. So for that particular cohort of students, we do have a specific profile that is a bit slower than others. Whereas, for example, the fast jet community, they've done it before. So we do have a much more aggressive, between brackets, of course, profile. Where we end up taking them to much higher altitudes for them to be able to, for example, make a mayday call, because that's what they would have to do in real life. So with this, what we are trying to do is you can't perfectly simulate something that is going to happen in the air, but at least it's something more familiar to them, and to increase the training fidelity.
And do any of the students ever get a fit of the giggles or anything like that?
Yes, so you do have the happy hypoxic, where they just giggle away, and they're very happy, but you also have the kind of drunk student, or we haven't had any aggressive students, thankfully, but yes, definitely drunk giggly are quite common, yes.
Dr. Ollie Bird, who has worked at RAFCAM for 22 years, and he undertakes our chamber runs, and I think we'll be best placed to answer that further. Ollie.
Hello there.
Dr. Ollie, I was in the decompression chamber many, many years ago, and I can just remember feeling like the exploding marshmallow man from Ghostbusters. Why would that have been?
Indeed. So gases do expand in the chamber, and that's the result of a physical law called Boyle's law, where the volume of masses of gas are inversely proportional to the pressure applied to them, which means if you reduce the pressure, the volumes of gases are going to get greater. And that means that gases within our guts, within our sort of lungs, and within our ears and sinuses expand when the chamber is decompressed.
And is there any risk to taking your students into the decompression chamber?
Well, we aim to reduce risk as much as possible. Students fill out a self-declaration before they arrive. They'll then have a medical inspection before actually going into the chamber, so that we can make sure that they are as fit as possible and as fit as we'd like them for chamber runs. But there are always hazards to decompressing students in our hyperbaric chambers, so they're closely supervised and monitored throughout chamber runs by medical officers and pressure chamber operators.
And do you have staff inside the chamber and outside the chamber so that they can respond to an emergency very quickly?
We do. So every chamber run is accompanied by a safety medical officer on the inside of the chamber. There are then up to 2 medical officers on the outside of the chamber, one in charge of the chamber run, and a second medical officer to maintain eye contact with those students out of line of sight of the medical officer in charge, if the chamber capacity needs it.
And what sort of things do you ask the students to do when they're in the chamber and they're experiencing the decompression?
Well, nowadays we only use the hyperbaric chambers to demonstrate the physical and physiological changes of a rapid decompression, a rapid loss of pressure. Going back to the days when I arrived at CAM, we were also using the hypobaric chambers to demonstrate the effects of a lack of oxygen, which is now done using the normobaric devices that you've seen Dr. Vanessa Ganello-Ray demonstrate to you. So in the chamber, students will experience the physical changes of a rapid decompression. That might be gut gas expansion. They'll certainly experience the pressure changes in their ears on the climb and rapid decompression. And then once we're safely at our ceiling of 12,000 feet, the descent allows them to practice techniques for clearing their ears, which we'd expect them to be able to use in any flight.
Okay. Now, we're in a very long room at the moment, and we've got 4 chambers. It looks almost like a cross between a space age environment and submarines. So can you just describe to me what we're looking at?
So in the chamber hall, we have 4 chambers. They all essentially do the same job. Each chamber complex has a large chamber in which the students will be seated, and a small chamber with 2 communicating doors between the large and the small chamber. That makes each chamber complex very, very versatile in terms of leaving either the large chamber or the small chamber at altitude, while the sister chamber comes down to ground level. There are external doors as well, and once students are seated in the chamber, we'll close the external doors. Pumps will then take the chambers up to a base altitude of 2,000 feet. And once we're at 2,000 feet, we'll prepare the students for a rapid decompression. That will simulate a rapid window or door seal leak on their aircraft, or even a loss of a canopy. There are large reservoirs in another room that have been partially evacuated, which will establish the total ceiling that we're going to get to, the absolute ceiling that we're going to get to. These days, that's just 12,000 feet. In the past, it has been higher. When the students are prepared for the rapid decompression, we'll then count down to that rapid decompression making sure that the students are breathing in and breathing out at the right time to avoid any lung damage. And on the count of now, an isolation valve will operate, an RD valve will operate, meaning that the chambers will rapidly climb to 12,000 feet from 2,000 feet. Those changes will be accompanied by noise in the chamber as the remaining air leaves. It'll be accompanied by a drop in temperature and some mist formation as well. The students will experience some further gut gas expansion, which we encourage them to release by burping or farting. And then once we're safely at our target altitude, we'll begin our descent down to ground level.
Right, and so it's quite a sort of multi-sensory experience for the student.
You could say that, yes, it is, and it's something that the students will never previously have experienced.
No. Can we peek through the window?
Of course you can. So inside the chamber, there's capacity for up to eight seated students and the safety medical officer that accompanies every chamber run. The medical officer on the outside of the chamber will then make sure that the students are fit for further training before instructing the pressure chamber operators to begin the climb to 2,000 feet, which we can do now if you wish.
That would be really interesting, thank you. And just before we start, it looks like you're about to have a party in there. There's a whole bunch of blown up balloons.
So what you're looking at are some balloons in the chamber, and whenever we have visitors, we use the balloon demonstration to show the effect of the drop in pressure on the volume of the balloons. So hopefully, by the time we get to 12,000 feet, following our rapid decompression, you'll see a number of the balloons pop inside the chamber, and that's quite a nice visual demonstration of the effect of pressure on those gas volumes.
Right, I'm looking forward to seeing that. Thank you.
Good. Rich, are we ready?
Yeah, 3-5 checks are done.
Okay, so we'll climb to 8,000 feet at 4,000 feet per minute. So for this demonstration, we're going to use a chamber profile that we don't typically use with students. We're going to climb to 8,000 feet and prepare the chamber for a rapid decompression to 25,000 feet. Now that's the ceiling that we used to take students to when we were doing a hypoxia experience in the chamber.
Would that have been what I experienced in the early 90s?
It would have been what you experienced. The climb to 8,000 feet, followed by a rapid decompression to 25,000 feet, then descent to ground level at 4,000 feet per minute.
Hence the Marshmallow Man experience.
Hence the Marshmallow Man experience. And you can already see, I expect, some of the balloons getting slightly larger as the pressure in the chamber falls as we pass 4,000 feet. Because we're now only using the chambers to demonstrate those physical changes that come with a rapid decompression, our ceiling doesn't need to be as great as it was when you undertook your chamber training for the purpose of that hypoxia experience.
Do you ever have students panic when they're in the chamber and sort of fight to get out, or do people stay pretty calm while they're there?
Students are well prepared and know what to expect before they sit in the chamber, and only very occasionally the students get a little bit apprehensive about experiencing something that they've never experienced before. Over the years, we've put fewer courses of students in the chamber. These days, we're putting basic fast jet pilots and basic multi-engine pilots in the chamber. We're putting a small number of rear crew in the chamber, but all of them are know what to expect before they go in the chamber.
I can certainly see the balloons are getting bigger now.
Check out 8,000 feet high Henlow.
Check 8,000 feet. So the sound you can hear are the chambers stabilising at 8,000 feet. In a moment, I'll count down to the rapid decompression, which will be accompanied by some additional noise as the residual air leaves the chamber for the reservoirs, and we'll see some more balloons expanding and popping. Pre-RD checks. So these are the checks that are undertaken before the chambers are rapidly decompressed.
Isolation valve enabled and set for 39%.
And settings will tell us how high the chambers are going to go and how quickly they're going to get there. The decompression this afternoon is going to be in 3 seconds.
Wow, that's fast.
It is fast.
And is that as fast as you'd expect if an aircraft blew a hole?
It depends on the size of the aircraft and the size of the defect in that aircraft. For fast jets losing a canopy, a rapid decompression might be even quicker than the 3 seconds we're going to demonstrate this afternoon.
RD valve armed.
RD valve is indicating armed.
You're clear for rapid decompression on the instructions in medical.
And I'll count down now to the rapid decompression. Stand by for rapid decompression in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now.
5 seconds.
That is quite something.
So we saw, standing on the outside, or we heard the noise, we saw the mist formation as the temperature inside the chamber fell, and we saw the gas expansion in the balloons, many of which
I think
have burst.
All of which have burst.
Now you can hear the chamber stabilising, and in a moment we'll bring the chambers down to ground level at the quickest possible rate, which we'd only ever use if we had a catastrophic emergency in the chamber. You're then very welcome to join me in the chamber to feel the warmth, which is just like the putting your thumb over the end of a bicycle pump and depressing the piston, feeling the barrel of the bicycle pump getting warmer as you do so.
Right, okay. I was expecting it to be cold when we went in the chamber, but it's now
It
warmed
would be
up.
colder now, but by the time we get down onto the ground, it's going to be very much warmer.
Right.
Please mind your head and your step if you join me in the chamber.
Okay.
Rick?
Yep.
Down, down, down.
Down, down, down.
So that's the air rushing back into the chamber to get the chamber back on the ground. And the engineer is stood by the door. Once the chamber's on the ground, he'll open the door and you'll be able to join me in the chamber and feel the warmth created by that rapid descent.
Good gracious, this is like stepping into an oven.
Is it bringing back a few memories?
Yes. I actually really enjoyed it when I did it.
Yeah. It throughout my time here, it's given me a lot of job satisfaction to supervise students in their hyperbaric chamber training and hypoxia experience.
Yeah, it's another example of how you experience things in life with the RAF that you would never experience anywhere else.
Absolutely. The training that we put students through of all 3 services is something that no other aircrew might get the chance to experience.
So as you can see, the practical demonstrations of the various items of equipment that AMTW have requires quite a combined effort of instructors, engineers, pressure chamber operators, medics and administrative staff. And one of the people that helps to make sure that I'm in the right place and at the right time and to put it all together is our chief instructor, squadron leader Eric Pollock.
Hi, sir. Yes, so my role is just to try and coordinate training and make sure that instructors are in the right place, and we do that for about 2,000 aircrew every year. And in addition to that, we also teach on some of the external courses, for example, for the Military Aviation Authority as well, for the flight supervisors, the flight authorisers course and the air safety officers course. So it's a pretty busy schedule every year. Thank you very much.
That's a lot of aircrew coming through.
Yes.
And I presume that's tri-service. Is it also multinational?
Tri-service, and yes, there are certainly some NATO students on the flight supervisors course particularly, and also some of our aircrew courses here.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Eric. And now, obviously, walking down the corridor, there's many ways that we can learn lessons so that we can improve care for anyone in the air environment. And very much I want to take you down to our accident investigation lab, where I will be introducing you to Wing Commander Matt Lewis, who will obviously take us through his role. And I'm hoping that he'll explain just how long he's been doing this for the Air Force. So, Matt, welcome.
Good afternoon.
So, yes, Wing Commander Matt Lewis.
Hello, Wing
Hi.
Commander Lewis. Thank you very much for hosting us. We're really interested to hear about your role with air accident investigation.
Well, I've been doing this job ever since CAM opened all those 25 years ago. So our role here is twofold. First of all, to look at the medical causes of aircraft accidents, which occur very, very infrequently. So the main bulk of what we do is looking at the medical consequences of the crash. So how people got injured. If there's been a fatality, then we work with the pathologists to work out why they died, and also to determine the performance of the flying clothing, the safety systems that are involved in the aircraft, crashworthy seats, and also for the fast jet fraternity, the performance of the ejection seats. So when a crash happens, we will drop everything and literally dash off to the crash site to look at the flying clothing, the ejection seats, make the seats safe so that the post-crash teams can clear the site. And once we've gathered all those items of evidence, we usually bring them back to RAF CAM, where we go through them in great detail to try and find out if anything has failed, if something has gone wrong, and did the flying clothing or the survival systems contribute to the injuries that were sustained.
So do you actually do you test the equipment after the crash? So, for instance, if it was a pilot's helmet, would you do anything to...
Absolutely, yes. Particularly on the helmet side, and that's a big part of the work we do here, and also the research that stems from the accidents, is trying to improve the performance of the aircrew helmets, establish whether we are providing the aircrew with the appropriate impact protection. So if there has been a significant head injury, then we have, in one of the other labs here at CAM, we have a helmet drop test tower, and what we can do, we can try and replicate the forces that were involved in the particular accident, establish what forces the aircrew was subjected to, and establish whether the helmet did its job.
And I understand the testing capability you have for that. You can actually alter sort of the direction of the impact onto the helmet to make it appropriate to the aircraft.
Exactly. We can basically mount the helmet in any orientation we need to, and if we are concerned that a particular cockpit structure has been involved in the impact, then we can either take a piece of that structure or get a similar sized and shaped object and impact the helmet against that to see what the forces and the accelerations acting on the brain would be.
Looking around myself, I can see lots of helmets. I can see a canopy which appears to be partially smashed, and a number of different ejection seats. And I understand that the seating and the ejector capability are really essential alongside the helmet the aircrew wear. So can you tell me a bit more about your role in looking at seats and ejection capability after an accident?
So the ejection seats that we have on display in the laboratory, some of them have been actually used in accidents where we have stripped them down. We usually try and establish if the pyrotechnics, the explosive charges in the seats have actually functioned correctly. For the most part, they do. It's a very reliable piece of safety equipment, and we make sure that they have done their job. Coupled with that, if we do find any unusual pieces of evidence to suggest that the seat hasn't functioned correctly, then we try and tie that in with any spinal injuries that may have been caused by the aircrew. And also we have quite a large number of helmets and other pieces of accident evidence that we have accumulated over the years, and all the helmets that are on display here have in some way or other either been used for research testing, so we've impact tested them, or they have been used in aircraft accidents as well. And the canopy that we have reconstructed, that was from an accident a good few years ago now, where the system failed to shatter the canopy as you would normally expect, and the resulting issue with that was that the aircrew essentially ejected through a virtually intact canopy. So the injuries that that individual sustained were more severe than you would normally expect, and it was a good example how an unusual medical presentation, an unusual injury, actually directed us to a failure in the escape system, and we were able to establish why the system failed, and then you make recommendations to stop that happening again, which we were able to do.
And so it closes the loop, I guess.
Exactly, yeah.
Certainly something I'd like to say at this point is that very much our service here at CAM over the last few years has been led by Wing Commander Matt Lewis and Wing Commander Nick Green, and both of whom have been honoured. And very much recently, Matt was awarded the OBE for his services, his longevity in this role, and it's something that we're absolutely proud of that he's done for us. And later we'll hear from Wing Commander Green as well. But yeah, it's something that we should rightly celebrate. So just wanted to mention that while we're here.
Thank you. Many congratulations to you. I'm sure it
was a very pleasant surprise, I must admit.
And well deserved, well deserved. One of the elements I'm really interested in with air accident investigation is the human factors element. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so the other half of our department here looks after the human factors, the aviation psychologist team that we have at CAM. Their role is to work very closely with the service inquiry panel, and their job is to identify if there was any problem in the way that the aircrew were flying the aircraft, in the performance of the aircrew. Did they carry out the right emergency procedures, and working through that on all the sort of human factors elements, and also not just the accident itself. What they look at as part of their investigation is the human factors leading up to the day of the crash. So were they fatigued? Were their shift patterns? Were they suffering from jet lag? Have they been on deployment around the globe? So all that aspect is taken up with the human factors expertise that we have at CAM.
And you told me earlier it's quite unusual for there to be a medical cause of an air accident. Is that also down to CAM and the work that you do around keeping aircrew healthy?
I'm not sure it's down to CAM. I think it's more a reflection on the extremely good medical care that is out there on station. It's the SMOs, the flight medical officers, who are actually looking after our aircrew and identifying whether they do have cardiovascular problems or other medical issues, and they identify them early. They treat them and they get them fit to fly. So yes, CAM partially is involved with that, but I think it's down to, good medical care.
Lovely.
But noting that they all have to come through CAM for their training, so CAM does train them to be that good out there.
You obviously play a really key role within air accident investigation. Do you offer the same service to our colleagues in the Royal Navy and the Army, and even to civilian colleagues?
Yes, so the air accident investigation is fully tri-service. So we will go out and conduct investigation with Army crashes and also the Navy. And there is a reciprocal memorandum of understanding between ourselves and the civilian air accident investigation branch. And if there are particular aviation medicine issues with some of their crashes, then they will invite us in on a case-by-case basis to contribute to those investigations.
When I was deployed in Afghanistan, we undertook trauma audit the whole time, and the information that we discovered about the trauma injury pattern was directly fed back into the design of personal protective equipment. You've already mentioned that learning from the canopy incident has been fed back into how future equipment's designed. Do you have any other examples?
Yes, hopefully all our recommendations are taken on board, and ultimately we're trying to improve the safety equipment that the aircrew flying with. So we work closely with the manufacturers. So we've done that with Martin Baker, who produced our ejection seats, and we fed back to them the experience we've had in terms of injury, and they have made recommendations and changed the ejection seats, not only for the UK but worldwide as well.
So really, really good outcome of your work.
I'd like to think so.
Right, so we've just learned there, obviously, from when it all goes wrong. So we're going down this way now. So taking those lessons from obviously when it's been maybe human error causing the accident or equipment error causing the accident, but taking those lessons now, we're going to the next lab, which is the aircrew equipment integration lab, which is the other end of the building. So we've got to traverse through quite a few fire doors to get there. So please, here to the right.
And I've learnt a new word when I was reading about the aircrew equipment integration group,
yes.
And that's, I may not even pronounce it correctly, anthropometry. Anthropometry, sorry.
Yes. So we'll hopefully see the rig when we get down there, but we've had some definite advances in that space over the last couple of years. So anthropometry is essentially working out the size of the human and the equipment you're going to put them in. So it's all their body measurements, so it's height, weight, width, length of all the various parts of your limbs, so that you can then reach aircraft controls and all the safety mechanisms within the cockpit. And I don't think the new scanner is actually here in this lab, but we've very much now got a 3D scanner. So essentially, you put the aircrew inside the scanner, and they'll do a 3D body scan, and then that will actually bring up that person as a 3D element. And
so does that mean that pilots or aircrew can be any shape or size?
No, there are limitations, because as much as we feed into the development of aircraft, there will always have to be limitations. So not all body types and habituses can be in those particular environments. Certainly, I suppose the biggest one that would come to mind would be weight. So each of the ejection seats, when they're made, obviously by a company like Martin Baker, they will have a particular body weight that they can cope with up to a certain limit. But likewise, you can't be too light either. So again, that's just one mechanism. We're now in the AEIG lab, and very much I'd like to introduce Erica. Erica, if you'd like to take us through the lab.
Hi, welcome to AEIG. So this is the section of RAF Cam where we get to play with all of these wonderful pieces of equipment that you can see. Not very great for radio, but I'm going to talk you through them. So my job and the job of our team is very much to look at the aircrew equipment that our pilots are wearing. So what we do is we do independent tests and evaluation of that equipment to make sure that not only are they the right pieces of equipment that have been selected for them, but that they're the correct pieces of equipment to be used in the relevant platforms that they're going to be integrated in. We'll have a look at it first and foremost on the person to make sure that it doesn't affect the anthropometric limits that you were just recently talking about, so that once you've got that person and the equipment inside the machine, does it actually change the dynamics? We'll then look at whether or not someone is able to carry out their work function. So it's a real balance of wanting to make sure that we're protecting someone to the best of our ability, but also can they carry out their daily job whilst they're using that piece of equipment. When we come into the lab that we've walked into today, we've got a variety of different platforms here that we can actually look at before we go onto the real aircraft. So we tend to use this for our kind of worst case scenario. So looking at, we've got a Gazelle here that we can get somebody in a cockpit. Obviously it's a very small aircraft, so we can look at somebody who's dressed up in the appropriate layers and get them into a small aircraft and think, okay, well, where are the main issues that they might be having if they're actually doing their role? Can they perform them? And then we know that when we've had a look at that on a small aircraft, perhaps when we go into the to the real platform that it's based on, we'll still be looking at the same areas, but we know where to focus the mainstay of our attention. We've also got an example of a Typhoon cockpit, a Hawk cockpit, and across in one of our hangars we've also got some larger rotary wing aircraft. So those are the desktops that we can have a look at before we go out to look at people in the main platforms. We've also got a climactic chamber, so we can look at how the equipment and AEA performs at different temperatures, which is relevant to the austere environment that they may be performing in. And we've got here what is a drop rig, so we can look at how that equipment might perform. So for example, if you're wearing something that's very heavy like a bulk, body armour, load carrying system, how would that perform if somebody is in a crash situation? Is that equipment actually going to cause secondary injuries such as coming back up and hitting them in the jaw? And we make sure that when we're bringing new equipment online that we test those quite rigorously to those standards.
So one of the areas that the Aircrew Equipment Integration Group work on is ballistic protection. When I was out in Afghanistan, we saw aircrew coming in who had been hit by small rounds from the ground. I just wondered if there's any new work or emerging work in protection in that area.
Yeah, I think as I alluded to earlier, some of the equipment that we have that is for ballistic protection, such as the bulks, is very heavy and is quite a cumbersome piece of equipment, and that can be very difficult for people to carry out their function and role on. So what we're hoping is in the next year to 18 months is that we can look for some lighter weight options for that protection. At the moment, we use a combination of hard plates and soft plates to create that protective barrier for our aircrew. But we're trying to make sure that we can minimise that as much as possible so that they are able to carry out their other roles effectively as well as be protected to the best of our ability.
We know in the past that a lot of military equipment and procedures have really been designed around men, and the military now is trying to be much more cognizant of the fact that a high proportion of its members are female. What work are you doing within the lab to actually take into account the needs of the female body versus the male body?
So this is actually one of the really exciting roles that I'm doing at the moment for the Tri-Service, looking at how we can enable our female aircrew within the work that we are doing in AEIG and RAFCAM as a whole. So you're right, in the past the evidence has predominantly been based upon males, and that's because that's who we had to be able to look at for subjects. It's recognised that there is a data gap within NATO nations, and that is something that we need to look at future. So if we look at what our equipment and our platforms have been designed on in the past, it's generally been data that's dated back probably about 40 or 50 years on surveys that we've done in the RAF back at that point in the 1970s, which was based on 2,000 males. So we have been doing some exciting work at RAFCAM in the last couple of years where we've been focusing on our female aircrew and trying to bridge that data gap that has been apparent for sort of the last 40 to 50 years. So we took some new equipment that we have, which is an anthropometric 3D scanner. We took that out on the road. We did a road show and we tried to gather as many of our female aircrew as we could over the period of time. And we gathered around 50% of that population, just over 100 individuals. So we've scanned them, so we not only know their sizes, and we've got a database for that, which we will be building upon over the years, but we also can look at the shape of them because it's a 3D scanner. So we've worked out from that and from previous data that has been going around in sort of other NATO studies, is that there are parameters that we need to consider for females to make sure that the equipment that we're providing fits not only them as a cohort, but also their male colleagues. And the work that we're doing is helping diversity as a whole to try and, as you say, make sure that the people that we do recruit and are recruited currently are protected appropriately. So we want something to fit well, we want it to be comfortable, and we want people to wear it correctly, otherwise it won't do its job.
I'm sure that would be very reassuring to the female cadre within the military.
Hopefully, yeah.
Erica, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Essentially, we're now going from the equipment lab and we're going to our environmental health and occupational health protection wing. And this very much is an absolutely vital part of what we do here, of looking at the absolute environment of the aircraft, and very much its noise, its vibration. Obviously, we're going into hot environments, cold environments, and also tropical environments, so you're definitely looking at all the hazards and risks to health, not just from obviously within the aircraft, but if you're operating the aircraft wherever we go worldwide, and obviously in the future, space. So just coming into the environmental team now, and I'll very much hand you over to Squadron Leader Costello, and he will take you through everything that's going on here.
We're in the office of the environmental health team, and we're here to learn really about your role on home bases and on deployed operations. Is it all about clean water, food and bugs, creepy crawlies, or is there more to your role than that?
No, it's certainly a lot more than just the creepy crawlies and bugs. We provide assurance of food and water supplies, advice on toxic industrial chemicals, advice on air quality, pest control, and many more aspects than that.
And so when, let's say, for instance, the RAF is preparing to go to a new place, new deployed operation, I understand that part of your role is to undertake a medical threat assessment?
Yes, it is. Flight Lieutenant Dixon is our specialist on that, and his flight produces those 4 self-protection instructions for deploying personnel on exercises, deployments.
And how important is it for the deploying aviator to actually read those instructions?
It's extremely important to know what hazards they're going to be presented, and also, more importantly, how to prevent becoming ill whilst on ops, because if they go ill, jobs won't be undertaken. It could potentially lead to operational failure.
Clean water, healthy food and good sanitation is obviously really important on deployed operations. What part does your team play in achieving that?
We could send personnel on recce's to assess the food, water and sanitation prior to personnel deploy. Corporal George Bull can tell you more about his experience when deployed on Op Greenlighter.
Thank you very much, sir. So I deployed on Operation Greenlighter to Turkey in February 2023. My deployable role out there was for the health protection of our deployed staff. So we deployed with a Role 1 hospital, and I looked at different aspects because we were in a very austere environment. We had no infrastructure. There was no toilets. There was no hand washing stations. We put up a field kitchen. So my role would have been, whilst we were there, I actually created hand washing stations using saline solution because the water froze overnight, so obviously that didn't freeze. We liaised with local contractors to use big diggers to dig out deep trench latrines, which is a very austere toilet, and then we put screens up. After a small period of time, we looked at building showers for people to use because people were bivvying out underneath shelters and then things like that. And once time passed and there was a bit more day-to-day runnings, we had a field kitchen put up, so I went inside and looked with my colleague, because there was an Army EH tech deployed as well, but we looked at the different aspects and making sure that food hygiene standards were kept up whilst working in the field kitchen, that there was hand washing stations outside. And another role that I actually undertook there was liaising with the UK Med Team, which is an NGO, non-government organisation, and they were there and we were working hand in hand together, and they asked me to provide a health protection brief on Shigella for people that were deploying to even more austere locations throughout the environment that we were deployed to.
So that really sounds like environmental health at the sharp end of your role.
Yes, it was, Mum. Yeah. I did things that apparently people hadn't done in many years. So going back to basic combat health duties. And then, that was it, really.
That sounds like a really responsible role. How did you feel being out there and being the person to whom everyone looked for a healthy living environment?
At first, it was probably quite nerve-wracking for myself because it was my first time deploying as an environmental health practitioner. Luckily, there was an Army EH tech there that had been a little bit more experienced. It was a bit of a learning curve for me because I realised how much people love dogs, and there were stray dogs. One of the afternoons I told them they weren't allowed to stroke the dogs, and I got booed by about 200 people. So that was a good experience. But once I was in at the deep end, it felt like a big responsibility. But once I reflected on my training and everything, I was fine.
And working here at CAM obviously gave you all the skills and knowledge that you needed to undertake that role.
Definitely. So we go through a degree program, and then as well as on-the-job training, and then being posted in here provided me with all the extra information and training that was required for deployment.
Thank you so much. We've already spoken with the doctor in charge of the Air Accident Investigation Unit and learnt about their role, but I understand the environmental health team have quite a crucial role to play post-air accident.
Yes, we do. As part of our duties that we provide 24/7 to Defence is aircraft post-crash management. We provide support to JARTs. Our lead on that is Warrant Officer Katie Miller, who'll be able to expand on our role.
Thank you, sir. Yes, so most recently I deployed on a post-crash management incident that involved a Hawk aircraft from Royal Naval Air Station Culdrose. Even though it was a Navy asset, as RAF Environmental Health, we respond to fixed-wing aircraft incidences, so hence why it became our responsibility. Myself and another environmental health practitioner deployed to the site, and we focused on our three main priorities when we're on site, which is the safety of all the personnel on site. Secondly is providing real-life support for all the people that are deployed to the site that provide cordon parties and things like that. And then our third element that we look at is the pollution control, pollution prevention and remediation of the land afterwards.
Thank you. Let me turn to Warrant Officer Lisa Tillett. Warrant Officer Tillett, part of your role is occupational hygiene assessment. Can you please tell me what that is and how you undertake it?
Yeah, of course. So here at OH, we have a variety of highly specialist monitoring equipment that we use. We use this to assess and measure exposures to many common hazards across the Air Force, such as chemical workplace hazards, or we could have physical hazards such as noise, lighting, other aspects of that. But something that OH Flight have recently been involved with is the F-35 platform. For the F-35, they're required to carry out operations within hardened aircraft shelters. Obviously, fallout of that was there's concerns regarding the risk presented by the aircraft emissions to the health of the ground engineers. So aircraft emissions, just like car emissions, have the likely to cause harm to individuals. So the team actually undertook a complex monitoring programme looking at exhaust emissions and the risk of operating that F-35 in hardened aircraft shelters. Our work and subsequently the report that followed now allow that squadron to adequately risk assess HAZ operations and undertake them safely.
So you've played a really key role in keeping ground crews safe during aircraft operations.
Yes, and it's enabled the F-35 to actually do further kind of defence, enhance their defence capability because they need to be able to operate in hardened aircraft shelters when they're deployed.
So obviously we just left the environmental and occupational health flights, and obviously they're part of our EOH wing, and very much you've had that wave top overview of most of the parts of CAM. One of the areas that unfortunately you won't get to see today is our centrifuge, which has been operating for the last 5 years. Brand new world-class capability, absolutely leading the way for our future research. And I know that one of the areas we want to get into is the future of aerospace medicine, but we are definitely using it in the here and now, both testing equipment and obviously training our aircrew to be able to cope with high rapid onset of G, as well as putting them in hypoxic environments, so up in the centrifuge. Maybe you'll be able to come back at a later date, maybe you'll be able to do a video podcast and come and see people being spun. Indeed, I'm always happy to entertain any star rank should they wish to come and have a spin. Right, so here we are coming to talk to our specialist who'll be able to tell you probably a little bit more about the centrifuge and the future of aerospace medicine, and I would let them introduce themselves, but I'll do it for them. So Wing Commander Felicity Leeming is our Command Flight Medical Officer, absolute font of knowledge when it comes to operationalising of aviation medicine experience and knowledge out in the field for our SMOs. Wing Commander Nick Green, who we mentioned earlier, and very much still very proud of him for award of his OBE, and that was very much for our centrifuge, our new centrifuge, and he's been our longest serving consultant, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Nick. How many years is it now?
Consulted in 2007, but in the Air Force since 1990, which is officially quite a long time ago now, I think. In our 35th year. And
then one of our newest consultants is Wing Commander Joey Britton. So recognising that we're coming towards the end of the podcast now, where we're talking about CAM now, I very much look forward, as a bit of a teaser, to your return in the very near future, where we'll meet at the centrifuge and we'll very much talk about the future of aerospace medicine, and we'll get to hear a few different voices, but definitely that is the exciting area that we're moving into next.
We very much look forward to that, but I guess today we're just focused on the here and now. Many thanks for joining us on Inside Air today. Could I start perhaps with the role of the Command Flight Medical Officer? Please would you explain what you do?
Sure. So I'm a GP by background, and basically the Command Flight Medical Officer is a GP who's done several tours on frontline medical stations. So for myself it was Cosford, Boscombe Down, Odium and Coningsby. We then do an extra AvMed qualification, a postgraduate diploma through King's College, and some operational training, and that makes us what's called a flight medical officer. And then the Command Flight Medical Officer is picked from those FMOs we have out on the station, so generally a GP by background. So what I do is, as Sir just said, is advise the GPs out on the ground, so fitness to fly type questions for our aircrew, our rear crew, people working in the back of aircraft, all and sundry really, and passengers. And then I also advise the MAA as well, and I work with my single service AvMed colleagues as well in the Navy and the Army, and in Joint Helicopter Command, and together we look at policy and medical standards for the military as a whole, for all our aircrew, passengers, supernumerary crew, etc., etc.
And I guess coming from a primary care background, you know very well how something really simple like a cough or a cold can have quite a big impact on aircrew.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of my role is to educate doctors and aircrew on how those sort of small day-to-day illnesses or medications that we just take for granted have an impact on flying. So as I say, part of that role is that education. So we have our initial AvMed course for all our new Air Force doctors or our civilians who work for the Air Force, and that's where we give them advice and training on how to manage aircrew, what is and isn't compatible with flying, what might cause problems. My role is then to fit that into what that what the aircrew's role is. So clearly some medical conditions, some medications will be fit for somebody who's in a multi-crew environment or flying at the back of an aircraft, but won't be suitable for somebody flying in a single seat fast jet. So what I need to do, and the reason I have the background I have, is to have that understanding of how that individual operates on that aircraft and what the stresses and strains and requirements are of people flying on that aircraft, both in a deployed setting and in the home setting as well. And clearly that includes training as well. So our air cadets, glider instructors, that whole sort of remit. So it's quite a vast, diverse group of people that I advise for, but it's obviously very interesting and something I really enjoy.
And does your advice alter between different aircraft platforms? So would you be given different advice to a rotary aircrew member versus a multi-engine or fast jet?
So the platform that the person is flying in and their role really feeds into some of that decision making, but it also depends on where the aircraft is flying. So if it's doing very long sorties, very short sorties, if it's flying in a benign environment or in an operationally more threatening environment, then we need to be understanding how that impacts on that environment as well. So that's why that understanding of what that aircraft does and what the roles on the aircraft are is so important. So I do a lot of liaison with the medical centres like on the front line, and then also in talking to the duty holders, the flight instructors, and the people in the squadrons themselves to better understand how we can best employ that individual on that aircraft and get the most out of the training they have. So that's quite a nuanced decision we're trying to make sure we keep people flying. That's the most important thing we try and do.
Is part of your role thinking about the impact of immobility for pilots? Because presumably sometimes they're sat still for very long times. Does that cause any problems around deconditioning with musculoskeletal issues, or do they have problems with the risk of deep vein thrombosis or clot in the leg? Is that something that you consider within your role?
So it is a little bit. Most of that we do through training in the AvMed training wing. So we do aircrew health education for all our aircrew, and that will involve keeping themselves fit and healthy to make sure that risk is as low as possible. But really, those very long sorties that some of our aircrew do, either with tanking in a fast jet or with long sorties in something like a Voyager, we would give advice about moving, moving the lower limbs, moving around a little bit, giving yourself a bit of a shuggle just to try and make sure that that isn't a factor. But actually, most of the time they're moving around anyway, so we're not too worried about that. But some of the advice I give is about clotting risk for passengers, and sometimes we'll be involved in giving advice to aeromedical evacuation at TMW about clotting risk for some of their patients as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm stood here in the presence of two air and space aviation medicine experts, and I'm really grateful that you're going to share with us some of your expertise. But I guess to start off with, I'd really like to know, what do you actually do?
It is a good question. You can, I think, safely describe us as the very nerdy end of the business. We occupy a strange role for doctors in that we do medicine, but we also do science, and we sort of dabble in engineering as well. There are not many of us in the country, a handful really, and the Royal Air Force has had a handful of us, well, probably since World War II, to be honest, just a small number. And what we try to do ultimately is develop and test the protection that's needed for pilots in the flight environment and all aircrew. So what that means is trying to combat G-force, combat the effects of altitude and so on. And the obvious thing would be we test the equipment that protects them against that, but beyond that, we also really develop what is needed by that equipment, so how that equipment should work, or how it should protect the pilots, and then we work with industry to get those solutions developed, and then we finally test them and see if they're fit for use on the front line. So it's not it goes all the way back to really the concepts of why we need that protection, and that needs physiological research, for which we use centrifuge, altitude chamber, so practical kind of hands-on testing.
If we go right back to the why we need the protective equipment, one of the big issues that pilots face, particularly fast jet aircrew, is G-force. Can you tell us what is G-force and what impact does it have on the body?
I'll let my colleague, Wing Commander Britton, talk about that, as he's deeply immersed in a PhD in that very topic right now.
Yeah, I thought it might be a fight, as we're both true G nerds. Yes, of course. So as Wing Commander Green was saying, part of our job is trying to fill the gap. Humans are evolved to be at 1G, which is us standing upright now, and sort of around mean sea level. And what we try and do is fill those gaps between what we want of our aircrew. So in a Typhoon, that might be up to about 50,000 foot and up to 9G. And really what G is it's acceleration by another name, but we just talk about G because that's multiples of Earth's gravity. So 9G is 9 times Earth's gravity. And everything weighs more. So we all weigh what
what we do because of the 1g of Earth's gravity. At 9g, we all weigh 9 times more. So taking off g is probably the quickest weight loss program you can ever do. But what that also means is everything in our body weighs more, including our blood. And that tends to, very simply, mean that all of our blood wants to go downwards towards our feet and not towards our brains where we want it to be when we're trying to fly a complex machine. If that happens for enough G or for long enough, then your brain doesn't get enough oxygen and you lose consciousness. And not being conscious when in control of a fast jet tends to lead to bad things to happen very quickly. So one of our big goals is to obviously stop that from happening. The difficulty is all the equipment we use to do that adds new burdens. So it tends to be big and bulky, or we're asking them to do a physical maneuver we call the anti-G straining maneuver, which is really quite tiring. So everything we do to try and protect people adds a new challenge that we also then spend many years trying to make as little as possible.
So you said there's some bulky equipment. What is that? What are the pilots expected to wear or have around them?
Yeah, of course. So most pilots who fly aircraft that can pull high levels of G will wear an anti-G suit. The design of those hasn't really changed much since the 1950s when they're first introduced. Various slightly different versions, but in effect they use air pressure to squeeze the legs and the stomach. And what that's trying to do is effectively like rolling up a tube of toothpaste. All that blood that's wanting to go down to your feet, it's kind of trying to squeeze it back up towards your heart and your head where we really want it to be. As I said, because they rely on these bladders of air, they've got to be air impermeable, which makes them quite hot. They've got to inflate, which makes them quite big. And all of these put more challenges on the aircrew. And that's something we'll come to when you next visit us about the futures and how we can try and address some of those problems.
So you said that the blood becomes heavy and drains down to the legs, and one of the things that I've read is about World War II Spitfire ace Douglas Bader and how it's thought he may have had an advantage because sadly he was a double amputee through an air accident prior to the war. Is that the case?
That's an interesting question. It does come up quite a bit. There has always been a theory that he had very good G tolerance by not having legs for the blood to empty to and to pool in. There's a theory that he therefore would have had a higher G tolerance. Actually, some of the more recent research I've been doing as part of my PhD, where we've been looking at where exactly the blood is pooling in the body under G, suggests that most of it is actually in your stomach, in your tummy, and in your thighs. And I believe he was a below knee amputee, so he may not have had as much protection as we have once thought.
The suit that the pilots are wearing, presumably that's pretty uncomfortable, and does it actually get painful when it blows up?
It's not uncomfortable if you're wearing it for short periods of time, but one of the areas we're looking at a lot at the moment is long duration sorties, so people flying for a long time strapped into a seat. You've heard about ejection seats, can't really move much, and you're wearing this pair of trousers, and even that in your car is not most comfortable. If you're strapped to an aircraft and you've got bulky trousers, then even less so. As they inflate, they do provide a squeeze on the legs. Generally, you're doing it for a short period of time and it's not painful, but it can get uncomfortable. And comfort is one of those things that limits how much protection we can give, because that limits really the peak pressure we can provide through the trousers. So if we could increase the comfort, then we might be able to increase the pressure as well.
And you said it's solving one problem, but I guess there's a risk it could cause other issues. So what are the risks of wearing an anti-G suit?
So not so much risks in themselves, but it can make you hot and warm, which makes you sweat more, which then reduces your blood volume in the first place, which actually then can reduce your G tolerance over a long period of time. But it's more the small things that we think about. We're starting to come up with a term called margin degraders. So they're areas where you're just knocking off small bits of your performance. So if you're wearing an uncomfortable trousers, you're thinking about those, you're not thinking about your primary task. If you're getting warm and hot and sweaty, then again, that's just eating away at your mental capacity and meaning you're not flying the aircraft quite as well as you could do if we can make those things better.
Are the aircrew at risk of acute kidney injury through dehydration?
I'll pass that over more because I've spoken more too much.
not from the levels of dehydration that we would expect most. It's a good question as we go forward, and I know we're talking about futures in another episode. At the moment, most fast jet sorties are in the order of an hour to an hour and a half, and that's related to fuel, really, and range. So in that time, a lot of them will deliberately dehydrate slightly because they don't want to go to the loo, and that's in this period of an hour and a half is a manageable thing, so they don't dehydrate that much. The question really comes as we shift to the future and we look for much longer duration missions. You can't really adequately dehydrate yourself for 8 hours without getting close to that. I think they're all young and fit, and I don't think we're quite in that territory. But it is one of those questions. I guess hydration is high on our list for the futures discussion. Yeah,
and it does sound odd, but one of the things we worry about a lot is going to the toilet in an aircraft, as you said, strapped to a seat. So if you don't trust the equipment that allows you to take a wee when you're flying your aircraft, then people dehydrate even more, and that's a real challenge, and particularly an area where we're working on as we try and get a more diverse aircrew as well, and making sure that that equipment works for everyone.
And we mentioned hypoxia. We've looked at the training equipment that enables aircrew to experience hypoxia. But what impact does that really have on the body? Clearly, it can cause loss of consciousness, but what other impacts are there?
Yes, we're interested actually in, at the moment, the more subtle effects of hypoxia. So loss of consciousness is very dramatic and a catastrophic event if you happen to be controlling an aircraft. But the more low levels of hypoxia, sometimes a pilot may not even notice through a small leak or inadequately fitted or sized equipment or a number of other reasons, can reduce your performance and can have an effect on your decision making. You can, for example, start making more risky decisions. And these are things that are potentially, Joe mentioned margin degraders, these are potentially things that are avoidable and yet might reduce your combat effectiveness. One of the topics we've discussed quite recently is facial hair, so wearing beards and masks. And there's been quite some discussion about whether it is safe to do so. And we all probably think that the risks from losing consciousness from that situation are probably relatively low, but as a margin degrader, as something that makes you very subtly hypoxic, makes your cognitive performance a bit less, you're a little bit slower than you would be as your best self as a combat pilot. So that's why the advice we've given is that any little thing like that might reduce your performance, you really want to try and avoid when you want to be on top of your game.
Thank you. That is so interesting and very reassuring to hear that our aircrew are in such good hands with you both investigating the physiology of air and how we can mitigate risks. Group Captain Miz, thank you so much for your time today.
You're most welcome.
For the input of all your staff. It's been such a fascinating visit. So what's next for the Centre of Aerospace Medicine?
So, as you know, I'm absolutely privileged to be in the position that I'm in. I've been in post now for essentially 2 months, and as part of my role here as the commanding officer is to look to that future, and it's actually the move of CAM. So 25 years ago we moved essentially from Farnborough up here to Henlow, and the future is to actually join up with our centrifuge up at Cranwell. So our centrifuge, as I think I alluded to earlier, has been up and running for 5 years, and it's in a fantastic facility run by one of our companies that we work very closely with, Thales, and we are very much hoping that our Centre of Aerospace Medicine will be situated either right next door to our centrifuge at Cranwell or certainly on the same site, so that we can have the synergies of having the whole team together. And that will certainly be the first time that both centrifuge and CAM have been together since the days of Farnborough, so over 25 years ago. And that's one of my, obviously as a commanding officer, one of my worry beads is obviously for the staff that work here and personnel, because it's a time of change, but very much to hopefully help them get through that change and recognise those synergies and get after all the positives and the benefits that we'll have by being on the station at Cranwell, where all of our aircrew have to come at very many stages of their career, as well as having our Phase 1 trainees come through and actually see where the Air Force is going with this high-end STEM technology and integration with the medical aspects.
And I can imagine, having seen all the varied and complex equipment that you hold here, it's going to be quite a challenge to move the whole unit to a different airbase.
It is, yes. I mean, so Cranwell is 80 miles north of where we currently are standing, and obviously there's the whole other part of Cranwell, which is Project Portal, the closure of Halton. So we're trying as best as possible to deconflict the two projects, and hopefully CAM will appear at Cranwell prior to Halton moving up there. And as I said to you before, once you come up and for the second podcast see the centrifuge and just see where we're at with that building, that infrastructure, that technology, and think, wow, when CAM gets up there, it's going to be of a similar stature. We're already hosting many international visitors, let alone MOD-wide visitors. And we've got our Capability Day coming up on the 8th of October, where we'll have wider defence being invited in.
Well, we will really look forward to that visit. Thank you so much for being on Inside Air.
Thank you.
This is Reheat for Inside Air, where we take a look at some of the RAF stories you might have missed. I'm AS1 Emma Kerwin. An RAF Voyager has successfully refueled Swedish Gripen fighters, taking part in NATO's biggest exercise in decades. The tanker has been flying sorties from Lossiemouth on exercise Nordic Response as part of Steadfast Defender. Steadfast Defender is showing NATO's ability to reinforce the Euro-Atlantic area during a simulated emerging conflict across the maritime, land, air, space and cyber domains. The RAF has been working more closely with Sweden in recent months, ahead of the country joining NATO in early March. 617 Squadron personnel have been working with Royal Navy aircraft handlers to launch F-35B Lightning jets to participate in Exercise Joint Warrior. It's a UK-led exercise where all three services, NATO and partner nations, train together to hone their skills. Up to 13,000 military personnel will be involved. The Princess Royals opened a permanent UK military facility on a United Arab Emirates airbase. Her Royal Highness was given a tour of the new headquarters, accommodation and welfare facilities at Al Minhad. Air Vice Marshal Pratley says the new facility will allow the RAF to conduct operations from the UAE and strengthen our operational resilience. Mountain rescue teams from RAF Leeming and RAF Valley have helped rescue a missing walker who set out to walk up Scarfell Pike. Cumbria Police asked for their help after an 18-year-old got into difficulties during heavy snowfall. The rescue operation lasted 16 hours. Tributes have been paid to an RAF technician who died in a motorbike crash in Aberdeenshire. Corporal David Thorne, aged 43, died after a crash on the A96 at Huntley on Tuesday, March the 5th, while he was on leave. He served in the RAF for 26 years and has been described as selfless. And the French Air and Space Force team have won the annual Le Crunch fixture against the RAF Rugby Union. AS1 Kerwin for Inside Air, you're up to date.
Thanks, Emma. And now it's time to find out who's under the hat with Ben.
I'm AS1 Ben Russell, and this is Under the Hat, where we get to know an aviator in less than a minute. Name you're known by.
Hello, my name is Squadron Leader Amy Hill.
What's your profession?
I'm a Medical Support Officer Reservist based at 4626 Paramedical Evacuation Squadron, Tactical Medwing at Brize Norton.
What's the best thing about your job?
Being a reservist offers so many opportunities to work with incredible people from all different medical trades. The people are definitely the best bit.
Hardest part of your job?
Stepping in and out of uniform, going from a duty weekend in a command job back to a normal civilian life on Monday. But I think it's these type of skills which are so transferable and set you up for any challenge life throws at you. So whilst it's the hardest bit, it's also one of the best.
Best location you've served?
My best location and best job I've ever done was as a regular and in the role of 2IC RAF Mountain Rescue. The challenges of the job and the rewarding experience of not only being able to support the teams from a weekly administrative perspective, but deploying as Troop 14 to some of the most incredible but hostile environments the UK has to offer in rescuing people in need. I genuinely can't think of a better job than that.
What bit of luxury kit do you never deploy without?
So I would never deploy without AirPods, because you never know what snorer you're going to be sleeping next to in a bed or on a floor in a church hall.
And what's your proudest moment in the RAF?
So this year I was awarded a 2-star commendation for my services to Mountain Rescue following the death of one of our squadron members and an incredible friend of mine. The honour of not only being able to support his family and the squadron through that time, but to be formally recognised for the resilience and emotion that took of me has been one of the proudest moments of my life.
Thank you, Squadron Leader Amy Hill, for a commendable appearance on Under the Hat.
That's just about it for this episode of Inside Air. Please give us a review, subscribe via your favourite podcast app, and join us again soon.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.